Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 9 of our season 2 series of Lit Happens. Today's focus, Great Gatsby teaching in preliminary English. Our fabulous Adriel is going to be driving this session for us. How are you this week, Adriel?
I'm good, thank you. I'm good, thank you. Feeling very roaring 20s, 1920s
Hmm.
jazz feel here at the moment, so we'll be good.
Lovely. Getting in towards the last kind of few weeks of the term now when this episode hits. So we hope that everyone's, holding on for dear life, trying to
Mhm.
get their way through it, maybe having a few drinks at night just to ease some of that tension. We hope you're all doing well. And I'm really excited for this episode, Adriel, because not only are you going to give us a great breakdown of the classic text, The Great Gatsby, but you're also going to make links to the new syllabus that has just started this year, 2026, for
Yep,
New South Wales teachers. So, looking at that new preliminary course. Now, before we get into it, we always start off with our lit or quit, don't we? So,
yep.
our Gatsby themed lit or quit for today, chasing the green light, Adriel, like it's the last spot in the staff car park on a Monday morning. Is that lit or quit?
I think that's definitely lit, especially when you're thinking about schools these days and the size of a lot of their car parks. You're
Yep,
definitely chasing that unattainable spot sometimes, as we
totally.
as we'll sort of see in some of these things. But yeah, no, I think that's definitely lit for a lot of the teachers. You want to be getting in, especially. I know previously I used to be very, very early, so I would never need to worry about that. But in recent years, the time has definitely caught up to me, and these days I sort of trundle into school. So sometimes getting that last spot is a godsend, isn't it? As attainable as
Totally.
it might be sometimes.
Oh, 100%. I think about the difference between mornings when I'm running on time and I've got my pick of the staff, parking spots, and then mornings where like my son is just not cooperating and daycare drop off has not gone well. And the last thing that you need is to be searching for parking spots. So you're
Spot,
absolutely
yeah.
right. It's definitely lit there. Spot on. Well, Adriel, are you able to lend us your expertise on Great Gatsby and get us into the episode then?
Yeah, sounds good. So I guess we're
Uh,
gonna start to look at a few of these
yeah.
questions.
Yeah, let's get into it. So the first thing we wanted to ask you on the Great Gatsby is how does it link to the NESA's preliminary reading to write module? So for the advanced course, this would be, reading to write transitioning to senior English. So how does it
Yeah,
link? Take us through it.
yeah. So I guess we're focusing on that, I guess that transition there, and we're looking at an intensive close reading of quality post fiction text. Now, in the reading to write unit, as we sort of discussed, you want to sort of link your students to, or sorry, expose your students to a variety of texts, short text, extracts here or there, but you do want one guiding sort of prescribed text, and what better way than to look at Fitzgerald's hit novel, The Great Gatsby. It's fantastic. It's funny, we've sort of discussed this with a few individuals previously. I say this to my students. I'm not necessarily a big fan of literature in this time, just because it just doesn't engage me as much in terms of the entertainment value. However, the literary merit and the
Mhm.
value of this text, it's unreal. Literally every single sentence of Fitzgerald's Gatsby is just so full of meaning, power, underlying meaning. Like it's just great, and it's a great text to sort of teach students a multiplicity of different approaches to text, but also the ways in which we can look at the quality post fiction text, analyze its language forms, features, structures that shape meaning. So I think that's quite significant for us. Um,
Yeah.
and I think if we're looking at Fitzgerald's text in particular, and the reading to write unit in particular, his prose demands, but also rewards a sustained analytical rigor that we want our advanced students to cultivate in their own writing.
Yeah.
So I think it's quite important for us to actually address that. It's a quality text, and it's fantastic. I mean, what it does is it facilitates a perceptive analysis of things like textual form. We're looking at narrative perspective. We're looking at symbolic patterns throughout the text. We're looking at tone and the way that he uses tone. And through studying this text, what we're getting is we're positioning our students to experiment with these sophisticated compositional techniques that we can draw directly from the text itself. So it can be used sort of as a direct precursor to the
Mhm.
demands of the Module C craft of writing uh, unit, which they will eventually move into. But
Yeah.
yeah, look, it's a great, rich prose text that definitely has things like layered symbolism. It rewards multiple sort of readings of the text, and I think it's also, beyond just the reading to write unit in terms of imaginative compositions. It's ideal for building a lot of that analytical confidence as well. So when we get
Yeah.
into that critical close study text as well, it's fantastic for our E11 students. So um, yeah, I think in practice, the students who will deeply engage with Gatsby's sort of things like narrative voice, or look at his layered representations of illusion, maybe ambition, maybe sort of moral decay. It invites sort of this evaluation of also how context informs textual
Mm.
construction and reader responses. And again, we're talking a lot at this advanced level. It's a great text for advanced level students. I
Yes.
wouldn't recommend it necessarily for the standard course. I think it might be a little bit too
Mhm.
intensive, but it's a
Mhm.
very rich text. And as you can sort of hear already in a few of the things that I've mentioned, it's got great conceptual depth, and there's much textual evidence in it, which we can look at in pretty much like a shorter course. It's not a very lengthy novel, but it's just dense and rich. So it is fantastic for our reading to write unit in particular.
Yeah, you've made some really clear links there and made a really good case for the way Gatsby connects. I like that you talked about not only is it rich in its ideas and values, and that could be something that you're springboarding off of to get to that creative component as well as analytical, but also all those language features. Like when you were listing all those, like the illusions and things like that, it's really nice because if you're trying to do a bit of an array or suite of text here, you
Mm,
could pick a little extract or introduce a related text that maybe
yeah,
doesn't necessarily have the same ideas as Gatsby, right? But might be using that literary device in a
yeah,
similar fashion or with similar intent and purpose. And that's a
yeah,
very like reading to write approach. I love that. That's
yeah.
really, really great advice for teachers. Absolutely. All right, then if we're getting more into the novel itself now, looking at its features, what are the key historical and biographical context points of the Great Gatsby? And so, I guess more specifically, how does understanding the jazz age as well as Fitzgerald's own life story and experience enhance the reading of the Great Gatsby?
So we'll start off, I guess, with where the novel is set in particular, and then we'll build off of that in terms of Fitzgerald's
Sounds good.
context. So,
Mm-hmm.
just a few key little things. So, the novel's situated in 1922. I think you can look at this period as the zenith of post World War One, the post World War One economic boom. This is where we start to see the United
Yeah.
States, in particular, start to develop into the superpower that it is today, and especially moving into World War II afterwards. It's an era characterized by prohibition. So we're going to start to see
Mm-hmm.
things like bootlegging start to become quite a big thing here. Unprecedented consumerism, and we start to see the cultural ascendancy of jazz. That's why it's otherwise known as the Roaring Twenties or the Jazz Age. It's an era where materialism is now becoming quite a big thing, and then it's going to lead into things like the moral decay, which is one of those key themes that we'll probably discuss a little bit further as we do move
Mm-hmm.
on. um,
Mm-hmm.
but what we see is Fitzgerald designates this period as the Jazz Age. It's a term that captures both its exuberant surface vitality, but also looking at again that moral decay that I've been referencing quite a bit. Um, the author's own sort of trajectory here, so his pursuit of social elevation. I think that's quite important. We see this through characters like Jay Gatsby later on, and with the way that they are characterized. But yeah, he draws a lot from his personal experience, so ambition. Like we just said, the pursuit of welfare or social elevation. We see his relationship with a love interest in Zelda,
Mm.
which was one of his interests there. Really shaped the way he writes this novel, and also. again, I keep mentioning this idea of the pursuit of wealth, but eventual disillusionment with this pursuit as well, um, which comes with wealth and fame. So it infuses the text with authentic sort of representational authority that we start to see. One interesting thing that I will point out is, the novel did not become part of the canon until after um, Fitzgerald's death. So it's quite significant here as well.
Oh,
So
no,
during
really? Mm,
his contemporary sort
mm,
of time period, it wasn't really that popular of a text, but it starts to become canonized afterwards. I think also we're looking at, context quite importantly here, because remember it shapes or sharpens, I guess, our analysis of how some of the socioeconomic forces shape characters, values, and meaning during this time period. Um, so yeah, the resonance here enables students to interrogate, I guess, the extent in which the composer's lived experiences shape the critique of
mm.
aspiration and excess in
Yeah.
particular. Um, so I think that's quite important. And also the final sort of thing, some contextual understanding. What it does, it illuminates Fitzgerald's purpose. We've spoken a little bit about the authorial intent, the didactic purpose of a text, and
Mhm.
one of them is to expose the fragility of the American dream. This is quite
Mm.
significant throughout this novel. And also the
Yes.
persistence of class hierarchies, beneath the
Yeah.
apparent social fluidity of this time period. Remember, contextually speaking, this is an age in which post World War One, we're seeing an economic boom in America, and we're seeing
Yeah.
the rise of people who may not have had access to great wealth previously, now coming into the means in which they can jump social classes. So we're seeing that pursuit of the American dream becoming more of a fluid thing, however, with a lot of underlying issues. So, for our advanced students, this contextual lens will sharpen things like analysis of how historical forces can mediate or can represent textual meaning, and influence
Mhm.
in audience interpretation. So, this is important for their writing as well. And it's a core expectation, I guess, of the module as well. And it definitely lends into not only their 11 work, but also what they're going to be doing later on in the year 12 course. But yeah, those are some of those key sort of historical biographical contexts which we sort of
Mhm.
associate with the novel there.
Yeah, you've offered a lot of excellent ones that a lot of students, like you could do a bit of flip learning and students could get into the historical aspects of it. But I like that you're highlighting that idea of the forces and like the zeitgeist of not only what's shaping the novel itself, but
Mm,
the author. Because I think it's really good in that reading to write to get the students to think about what they are might maybe influenced by and what they are seeing in their world and a comment or a message that they want to be relaying about that and maybe using that to encourage them with their own creative writing. So I love that connection there. I think it's so powerful to teach it that way and also start getting into the how do we
yeah.
contextually examine a text in preparation for mod A and B that they're going to be doing in the next two terms. That's
Mm,
really excellent. Thank you.
mm,
Well, if we move on then to kind of the next bit of examining the text, what are some of the central ideas and themes in The Great Gatsby, and how do they resonate with year 11 students that are trying to explore these human values and just the human experience in general, getting those ideas in their mind in preparation for future study?
yeah. And as you can sort of see, it is that common module ready to write. And we're looking at some of these humanistic values which make the text endearing, what makes them part of the canon that we sort of look at. So some of the key
Sure.
ideas in relation to humans that we want to maybe explore, and this is what the Great Gatsby is really rich in. We're looking at the corruption and hollowness of the American dream, so the pursuit of success and wealth, which could lead to the emptiness and destruction that we might sort of see again, even in our world right
Mm.
now. We look at
Yeah,
class
very relevant.
divisions yeah, we look at class divisions, illusions of social mobility. So old money versus new money. We look at rigid
Mm.
barriers beneath the surface. We also
Yeah.
look at things like the obsession, so illusion versus reality. How some of these characters might chase those unattainable ideals, like the chasing of that last parking spot, the green light might represent, as we sort of discussed earlier on, moral
Yeah.
decay amid materialism. So ideas of excess, infidelity, carelessness of the wealthy. I mean, a lot of these sort of resonate today. But I'll go into depth into in regard to a few of these sort of key themes and ideas. Um, Again, I need to emphasize this: the text constitutes a sustained interrogation of a lot of these ideas, and in particular, it's a sustained interrogation of the corruption inherent in the American dream. So this is the belief that material success equates to the fulfillment, but this proves tragically illusory within the novel. Now, why am I
Yeah.
mentioning this? Because these are deep layered concepts which students can really embed in their own writing. It's not just a simple
Yeah.
surface level idea that they might write about. Like, what we're wanting them to write beyond. And what Gatsby does is we're looking at these concepts that resonate with, like I said, human values, human experiences, human ideas, which make the text endearing and really make this text part of the canon that we have come to know. Um, so again, some of the other things, it dramatizes that entrenched class stratification. So
Yeah.
things like the entrenched power of old money versus the precarious performance of new money, which we start to see through the way Jay Gatsby probably is characterizing just the mystique of his character. Really, characterization is one of those techniques that we might look at later on. But his whole mystique is interesting. It's like, how does he gain his wealth during this post World War One period in the Roaring Twenties, and what does it do to him as a human being? Is these questions that we
Mm,
can continually ask, and also central is the tension between illusion and reality. We start to
mm,
see characters inhabit constructed identities in the pursuit of what we say these idealized pasts or futures. Again, these are complex ideas, which we see Fitzgerald really exploring. He also explores the destructive consequence of obsessive desires, whether they be romantic,
mm.
social, or material. And this
Yeah.
culminates in the moral and personal disintegration of a lot of the characters that we start to see. And again, it resonates with the readers. This is why the text is so rich. And this is the stuff that we would
Mm,
highlight with our students. This is what you want to start to look at. How does he do this? How does he use
yeah.
language? How does he use structure? How does he use conventions to really emphasize some of these ideas? Um,
Mm,
and that's the last few sort of things. The novel critiques the ethical bankruptcy that accompanies unchecked materialism. I like this idea of unchecked materialism,
I do
but it's
too. Mm,
epitomized, yeah, but it's epitomized by the careless indifference of the Buchanans, for example, within the novel, and you can really look at that as a focus point there. But yeah,
mm,
look, all of these concerns can really resonate profoundly with our advanced students in particular because they parallel some of those modern anxieties around performative success. I mean, you can really link it to even HSC. Like, what is it? It's that performative success, things like economic precarity. So, what happens when you guys start to come into money? Does it taint the character, or does it lead
mhm,
to moral decay? And also, you've
mhm,
got these curated illusions of digital identities in their contemporary worlds as well with anything social media. So there are a lot of these links that we can definitely make to the modern day student. And this is why Gatsby is a fantastic text to really resonate with the students and then really study, I think, in particular. So yeah,
mm. Absolutely. You're really making a case of how it could fit within Module A, narratives that shape our world, and all Module B. So it's a very,
yeah,
very versatile text. If there's one key takeaway that I think I noted that's really good for teachers and students in this listening, like you're definitely pitching this novel well,
yeah,
is the fact that if you move from just an idea of just desire or just love or just materialism and you try and look at maybe the
mhm,
messaging or the perspective around that, it's going to give students more of a voice and therefore a nuance when they might potentially be representing that similar sort of issue or perspective, but within their own narrative and their own context and their own point of view. So I think that's
yeah,
great. I really love that. That's a really great takeaway for everyone listening. Well,
yeah.
what if we're moving on now through the depth of the analysis? What are some of the key literary techniques representing Great Gatsby, and maybe a few key quotes that we can latch onto as well?
Yeah, awesome. So again, the purpose of using this for the reading to write unit is we need to look at the literary techniques, the construction of the text, and we look at the
Yeah.
language that Fitzgerald uses.
Mm,
So I guess just to list a few things before we go into depth, Fitzgerald definitely uses unreliable narration quite well by the protagonist or the perspective of Nick Carraway there. And we see a recurring symbolism, the green light. I keep referring to this. You probably see this in our a little thumbnail later on down the track. We look at
Mhm.
the eyes of TJ Ecclesburg as well, the Valley of Ashes imagery. I love the
Mhm.
party scenes as well because there's a
Mm.
lot of sensory overload. If you read each of his Gatsby parties, there is so much involvement, and it's a great sort
Yeah,
of writing activity as well for students. I
yeah.
know
Very decadent.
if
Mhm.
yeah, exactly right, and I know in particular, like, if I'm, um, doing a writing activity, a creative writing activity with my students where I wanna look at atmosphere or description, and then really have that sensory overload, writing about a party is so significant. You might put some jazz lounge music on as students write as well,
That's
and it just
cool.
gives them that
Mm,
sensory experience. So,
lovely.
it's fantastic. It's a great text, again, for all of these things, and this is it's funny, I've just mentioned this, I don't normally engage with this genre, I'm gonna say, of text for me personally, but
Mhm.
you can see the merit behind it and the appreciation behind Fitzgerald's writing that hopefully is coming across in the way I'm speaking about it, in today's episode. But look, let's go back into this unreliable narration through Nick Carraway.
Mhm.
What we see is, some of the
Mhm.
opening assertions there where he says, "I'm inclined, I'm inclined to reserve all judgments," and this establishes a persona of judicious detachment that the text progressively starts to undermine. So one of the things we start to see through the entirety of the novel is, how does it start to undermine these judicial sort of this judicious detachment, this just judgments that Nick starts to make, thus making him this
Yeah.
unreliable sort of narrator in particular. So you might even read deliberately things like, "In my younger and more vulnerable years, my father gave me some advice." This is the first page of Gatsby.
Mhm.
Just remember that all people in this world haven't had the advantages that you've had. It's quite interesting, and it's a good moral message for lots of our students to
Mhm.
undertake as well. So you can really
Yeah.
teach some of these moral messages to this next generation, which I think is important. Making them be good
Yeah.
human beings holistically as well.
Yeah. Looking
Um,
at privilege,
yeah,
things like that.
yeah, exactly right. I mean, one of the most symbolic symbols, a bit of tautology there. Well, the most synonymous symbolism there with the green light. It functions as this symbol of aspiration and unattainability at the same time. So
Mm.
its culminating invocation, what we see is, Gatsby believed in the green light. This is quote, sorry, Gatsby believed in the green light and the orgastic future that year by year recedes before us. So what this does is it crystallizes the novel's tragic vision that we start to, understand in the character of Gatsby. And this
Mm.
idea of decay, money not necessarily buying happiness. What are
Mhm.
what are we pursuing, et cetera, et cetera. If we look at the eyes of Dr. T.J. Ecclesburg, this constitutes a presiding motif of absent moral surveillance. If we're looking at teaching motifs, you might look at that through the novel. And we also see, the Valley of Ashes, which is rendered through the grotesque pastoral imagery. So, quote, "a fantastic farm where ashes grow like wheat into ridges and hills and grotesque gardens." So, this is a powerful indictment of the industrial capitalism during this time as well. So, again, as
Mhm.
we start to speak about some of these big ideas, we're looking at the language, the way that he uses, and these key quotes can often be maybe, if you're doing a writing activity, you might use some of these quotes as a starting point and get the students to write about these ideas or convey these concepts and ideas. And most
Mhm.
importantly for me, lastly, like I mentioned, I love the party sequences because what they do is
Mhm.
they're so dense. They're so dense. So, quote, "men and girls came and went like moths among the whisperings and the champagne and the stars." I know my copy, I think that's page 49, around there. But we see this
Mhm.
rhythmic prose. So you can really talk
Yeah.
about the tone, the rhythm, in that
Mm.
little quote there that simultaneously evokes and critiques the glamour of this life that the Gatsby parties in particular do convey. So yeah, some fantastic things there. Again, this is quick, and as I mentioned to you before, we might do like a few little breakdowns of specific things. I know today's episode is just to uh, mention like broadly, briefly ways into the text, but keep an ear out if
Mhm.
you are listening. There will be some separate episodes where we'll break down some of these things in greater depth and detail, and hopefully you guys enjoy them. And you're using these texts again. I'm saying Gatsby is for reading to write, but as you've mentioned, you can definitely apply it to multiple texts. Remember, in E11, it's one of those things that we have open for us, and it's a fantastic, very rich text for
Mhm.
us to actually use. So, yeah,
Yeah. No, you've definitely made an excellent case for that with lots of nice characterization and lots of nice techniques and examples. I think as well, what you're really conveying here is how well the novel connects to, anyone who has programmed for the new year 11 prelim syllabus, particularly this term one, the reading to write, knows that genre has become a bit of a focus of
mm,
those outcomes. And so a lot of what you suggested ties in so deeply to that. So that was
yeah,
really, really great. Just one thing that I was thinking about as well while you were suggesting this, if you're thinking, I can't do like I love all these ideas and I love the language, but I can't do a novel in that term because we're doing X, Y,
mm,
Z. There's also Fitzgerald's short story, Winter
yeah,
Dreams. You and I have both read
yeah,
and taught that in different circumstances. That has a lot of similar issues, desire,
mm,
class, and obviously beautiful language in a short story format. So if you're wondering, I love this, but I can't do the whole novel, maybe take a squeeze at that. It might be really, really helpful.
yeah,
All right,
yeah. That's great.
fantastic, Adriel. Could we do one more question with you, please, in terms of
Yep.
Gatsby? Um, and can we look at how can teachers actually now guide students to apply these Gatsby techniques
Mm,
within the reading to write outcomes, which is all about how the text can inform the student's own writing? So, how does it
mm,
move from like we've looked at it, we've analyzed it, to how do the students use parts of it as inspiration for their own
yeah,
writing?
yeah. I think in particular here is making sure they know what the techniques are. So, if we're looking at
Mm,
imitating maybe motifs and symbols, making sure we're identifying some of these. So they
yeah,
might create their own sort of motifs or their own symbols that become significant, that reflect certain ideas. Again, don't just
mhm,
go out and say, find a motif or make a motif up. Give them a concept. For example, a
yeah,
Gatsby party is full of decadence. Well, what would you use to represent this idea of decadence and maybe moral decay? What would be a motif that
mm,
you might use as a central piece of your story? You might also
mm,
guide them in one of the short texts that you teach alongside this. I know I often read a story called The Boy, which is fantastic because the title itself, The Boy, Buoy, has this double entendre, this double meaning to it, but it's so
yeah,
symbolic. The motif runs through the entirety of the text. So again,
yeah,
making sure students understand how to really, really apply these techniques. So I think that's important. Making sure they experiment with things as well. So, experiment with unreliable first person narration or a first person voice. Maybe reflect writing personal bias or shifting perspectives. You'll notice the key thing that I'm going to continue saying is just this process of practice, edit, and refine. I think that's going to be very,
yeah,
very significant when we're guiding our students. It's one thing to have all the content, but if they're not putting it into practice, there's no use having this. So, crafting sensory descriptions. I mentioned this, for example, you put in the music on whilst they do a 30-minute or forty
yeah. I
minute
really
writing
like that. That's
activity.
cool. Mm,
It's definitely something that will help with the rhythm and the tone. And I mean, some of the comments I've had from students is like they actually feel like we have to write this upbeat sort of feel. But again, if they're writing upbeat, remember we might be looking at moral decay as something that is what's the underlying sort of idea in a party. So how would you then use your language to represent or reflect that? And then that's
yeah,
where that editing and refinement process comes in. You might explore
yeah,
perspective shifts, so the rewriting of key moments. I know we've discussed this previously. So you might give them an extract and write from a different perspective. Um, and looking at those compositional choices, I think reflecting on our own compositional choices as well, because that will then get the students to look at the reflective writing component of the reading to write subject as well,
mhm,
so it's module as well. So if I go a little bit
yeah,
more into depth here, if you're encouraging the students to write, about personal recurring motifs, you might have something that might be analogous to the green light. What might be their, thematic coherence or symbolic resonance, something that continually resonates with not only them as they write through the piece, but what might resonate with the reader about a certain idea. It's not just a motif for the sake of a motif, but what is that authorial purpose when you are using this. Again, the experimentation with unreliable or that focalized first person narration, and how it helps to foster sophisticated reflective writing that interrogates
Mm,
subjectivity, maybe even interpretive bias.
mm,
The appropriation of Fitzgerald's images, or the
mm.
rhythm and the density of his piece. What this does is it enables our students to craft vivid, sensory-driven descriptions
Yeah,
um, in either discursive or imaginative responses. I think that's quite interesting that we mentioned the discursive responses as well here. Looking
yeah,
at the multiple sides of the coin when it comes to some of these ethical, maybe moral issues that are reflected during
yeah,
this time.
yeah,
Um, I think also like perspective shifting exercises. So we just mentioned, the rewriting of different pivotal moments from alternative viewpoints. What this does is it helps to deepen that persuasive reflective capacity, but also gets them to evaluate some of the competing representations of ideas within the text. And then
yeah,
finally, I think one of the big things that we might look at is the explicit metafiction or compositional sort of decision making. So I guess a question that we can ask is, in what ways did my deployment or implementation of a motif or imagery shape meaning and reader response? So really get them to reflect on this, because if they
yeah,
understand why they put things in, they have an awareness of their process. And that's very,
yeah.
very important in mirroring NESA's emphasis on, this idea of process awareness and reading to write. Yeah, so there's some fantastic things here that we can definitely use. And I think one of the important things, again, with Fitzgerald, maybe a prompt that we might look to use in our own reflective writing, if we're doing this, might be something like compose a reflective response by exploring the pursuit of an illusory ideal in your own experience,
Mhm, mhm.
whilst consciously employing a symbolic pattern or tonal um, idea from that might be drawn from Fitzgerald's writing. So these are things that we can use in particular for our own writing when it comes to our works and the way that we apply this to the reading to write unit for our students.
Yeah, I love that. I think you've offered a lot of great suggestions on, yes, obviously the imaginative writing, because that's usually what the assessment is in this first term. But I also
Mm,
like the food for thought you gave us on the discursive, particularly using discursive writing and discursive thinking to potentially deepen the students' understanding of some of the context in the text, and maybe even bring them to a point where they do have a perspective on an issue, then they
yeah.
can represent that in the imaginative. And then also looking at the reflective writing, I think that's when you're looking at the newer exam papers, it's
Mm,
becoming even more important that the students are very clear on not just the deliberate choices they make, but on how well they
yeah.
feel they've executed them and what the thought process was. It's becoming, I feel like the reflective reflections are becoming a
Mm,
little bit
mm,
more personal.
yeah.
They're sort
Yep.
of balancing now with that analytical, and yeah. So I think you've offered some fabulous suggestions, particularly if teachers are teaching Gatsby, but also if you're teaching another text, you've also offered
Yeah.
great suggestions where you can sub in that strategy for a different novel of a different time
Yeah.
frame. So that's
100%.
excellent.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You've given us so much information here, Adriel. Thank you so much. So much wisdom here, so much detail. Um, Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you guys for listening. Big thanks, obviously, to Adriel for conducting all this research and all his applied teacher experience. He's definitely taught, can tell he's taught the Gatsby a few times and have taught it very well by the sounds of everything he's covered here.
Thank
So,
you.
very grateful to you, Adriel, and also really grateful to our listeners that keep tuning in. We're going to be trying to do a bit more text type segments
Mm,
coming up, and also starting to, I know I've started, we're going to be doing some more reading of the new year 12 texts that are coming up, and hoping to offer you some episodes on those texts in the
mm,
near future, so you
yeah.
get them just in time before these year 11s transition into year 12. But as always, we've got the banner down there with all our different places that you can contact us. send us your thoughts, comment on our Spotify, any questions you have, any suggestions you might have for future episodes. We would love to hear from you, because this is why we do this, for all our fellow English teachers that Adriel and I love to listen to Gabba about what they're
Mm,
teaching. It's the most fun thing.
yeah.
So yeah, let us know. Please keep engaging with us. We really appreciate all of your support.